Am I audible? Yeah. A little more. Hello. Is that okay? Hi, everybody. Hi, welcome to CARA. My name is Andy Catedral. I am the Public Programs Curator in CARA. CARA stands for the Center for Art Research and Alliances. And we opened officially in October with exhibition, but really I'd like to think that we truly began just a little bit before that last summer with a series of programs called Conjurings, and I'd like to think to that time because the very first artwork that one encountered when they arrived here was the beautiful poetry of the Millennium and National poet and artist Diane Birds, which was installed right in this very corner. So our mission to those who are here for the very first time is to expand. It's one of expansion, to expand historical records and public discourses to reflect art's abundance, abundant pasts, presents, and futures. We're very much about pluralities here. And I encourage everybody to see the current exhibition. It's a group exhibition, and we learned so best, curated by our executive director and chief curator, Manuela Moscoso. It's an exhibition about what that touches on how body and technology are not discrete, but actually are intertwined territories, and features the work of the local artist Suzanne Kite, whose work is installed in the second floor. I encourage everybody to come this Saturday if you're in town, because she will be performing a Rocky Wing finale performance that will be interpretation and activations of her dream scores, which are also engaging with CD writings with shape geometries. So, and also we have a program this coming Friday with the artist Samiko Lee, conversation with Aki Sakamoto. So with that, I highlight the last letter of our acronym, Alliances, which defines how we're lucky enough to get to host the first summit for local context here today. And I turn the mic over to Jane Anderson. Thank you.
Okay, everyone hear me? Great. Thank you so much, Emmy. Thank you so much, Cara. Thanks for the team for organizing this first summit of local context. It's really exciting to have you all here and to kind of share the work that we've been doing. I think we really happy to kind of celebrate a lot of the work that we've been doing. But before we begin, like get Riley in the door. Hi, Riley. Before we begin, I want to begin with an acknowledgement. We're here in Lenape, lands of the Lenape Nations. I want to pay my respects to the elders, to the future generations, to the Lenape diaspora who are no longer on these lands and waters, and have been removed to Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Ottawa. Kind of do a land acknowledgement because of what this work is about. This work is about addressing the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Settler colonialism has traditions and has habits, and many of those are embedded in structures. And so a lot of the work that we do at local contexts is to try and transform those structures, creating different kinds of possibilities kinds of futures that acknowledge that we are always on land, and we need to always be respectful guests on those lands and waters. So I just want to also begin by talking a little bit about kind of the genesis of the context to some extent. I'm here representing the Local Context Council. Do you guys want to have a seat? And Local Context really began 12 years ago as an initiative trying to think about the embedded bias within intellectual property law itself, and the way in which law functions, particularly intellectual property law, functions as a tool of dispossession and erasure. And so thinking about the way in which law maintains particular biases, particular exclusions and erasures, and how it wasn't serving Indigenous interests in the kind of return of collections or return of control over knowledge and different kinds of resources. So we began thinking about what other kinds of solutions could you develop that could bring Indigenous authority, acknowledgement, autonomy, sovereignty back into institutions that hold Indigenous collections. That's kind of the first place we started thinking about that. Of course, that kind of then grew to a much bigger project that kind of crosses the humanities and the sciences, moves into areas of data and data sovereignty, and kind of takes seriously the responsibilities that both researchers have, as well as institutions that hold Indigenous collections, to disclose those collections, as well as making them available to Indigenous communities so that there can be Indigenous governance over those collections and data into the future. So we began as a research project to some extent, and then over 10 years has been iterating with the labels with communities around the world. Our team is based in at least 2 countries at the moment. Our team in Aotearoa, it's very early for them, so they'll join us online when they're ready. But we've also been able to transform and to think about sustainability of local context. So it's not just funded by soft grants from the federal government, it's actually an organisation that can sustain itself. So we're now a not-for-profit, registered in the Navajo Nation, and kind of starting towards a different kind of model of sustainability for the organisation and for the communities that utilise the labels and see the potential and possibility of transforming those structures through their own designs. I guess I want to say as well that the labels are a particular tool, a particular mechanism that bring Indigenous voices back into these spaces, but they're not the answer to these larger problems. They're a means to get somewhere else. They're a kind of tool to kind of take people in different directions. So I think a lot of the projects that you'll hear about today touch in so many different other areas and kind of activate change. And that's really what the labels are, kind of activators of change and activators for different kinds of relationships. And I think that's kind of what's exciting about what the potential of the labels are. So we're really just here today to kind of like celebrate all the work that has been going on, all the community work that has been happening to kind of make the labels do the kind of authority and sovereignty piece that is required of them, as well as hearing from researchers and also institutional representatives to kind of talk about what this decolonial future actually can be that we're moving towards. I want to really thank my local context team, Corey, Felicia, Ashley, Vanessa, Jeanette, Carlos, Paulina, Rebecca, everybody that's here that kind of makes it possible to kind of run an organization like this. We have, I'll skip that bit. We have a community of users that is across the world. Obviously very heavy in what's currently known as North America at the moment, and Oceania, New Zealand, Australia, but also in Europe, Europe institutions that understand that they have a responsibility around the collections that they hold, and the Indigenous communities that are in Europe as well as kind of moving into different spaces in Africa. and the different kinds of needs that the labels can respond to in those contexts as well. So we're kind of a global network, and that means that as our team grows, so does all the work. And I just wanted to share a little bit of that with you as well. So just two quick examples of kind of the potential and the scope of the labels. This is a song application on an iPhone from the Whakatōhea community in Aotearoa. They are sharing their traditional chants on their phone because a lot of their community are in different places. They're not just on their homelands in New Zealand, but kind of utilizing the labels to kind of indicate how some of those songs should be shared and what are the expectations that that community has in sharing those songs. So I kind of wanted to bring that to you, and we'll hear a little bit from Whakatōhea some more in a pre-record really soon. And then this is also from Aotearoa. This is kind of some plant specimens that were collected that Whakatōhea didn't know had been kind of collected within a national collection. But now Whakatōhea have been able to add their permissions and their consents back into that record in a different kind of way. So kind of spanning from songs to data to plant specimens is kind of like really the stretch of what we're working with, and kind of the capability and flexibility of the labels as a particular tool to kind of deal with those kinds of questions. And of course, just thank you to some of our sponsors. We got here through small grants to kind of build over this 13-year period. And I'm really grateful to all of our funders who've kind of seen both the potential and the possibility of change that comes from developing something that comes sideways at a particular kind of problem. So I'm going to now introduce Emily Johnson, who is going to facilitate our kind of day together. I'm really honoured to have Emily with us to facilitate. Emily is a land, water and tree protector. She is the founder of Catalyst Dance. She's also a co-founder of the First Nations Performing Arts. And so I'm going to introduce Emily to you. So thank you.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Kara, for holding us today and getting us started in a good way. So thanks to the entire local context team again, Jane and Corey, Alicia, Ashley, Alina, and Rebecca, Carlos. Thank you for bringing this extraordinary group of folks together today. I'm Emily. I'm also Emily, and I live between here, King, and and I'm from the Yupik Nation. I'm a dance maker. I'm an activist, director of Catalyst, and co-lead of First Nations Performing Arts, and an often collaborator and conspirator for the local context. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my work and why I'm here. As I said, I'm a dance maker, but really to me, making dance is about reworlding, and all of the work that you can hear today and that Jane has described are processes toward and for that necessary reworlding. We have a dance right now that's touring called Being Future Being. I want to call that into the space a little bit because it's really about conjuring or making that better future that we all kind of dream of and work for, but making that better future realized in the present. I work with a decolonization writer, which is a means to change the structural harm embedded in cultural institutions. And thanks to Jane, context, it includes elements, it includes sections toward protecting IP of myself and collaborators and the communities that I work with. It also has a section regarding disclosures that Jane mentioned. It goes into land use fees as well as abolition and anti-policing policies. So take a look at that. It's a really good tool to use with your cultural institutions, and it's also a great tool for artists and activists There's a template on the website, you can put it to use right away. With Ronnie from First Nations Performing Arts, we lead a decolonization track, which is an intensive learning series of sessions for presenters, executive directors, etc., leadership staff of said settler cultural institutions, settler-run cultural institutions across the US. Catalyst itself, the kind of dance gathering company that I run, is our tenant is land back. And so our gatherings and all of our projects are toward that. What that means. We host gatherings that encourage a reciprocal relationship with land, with each other, and with our morning community. Here in the Lenape game, that means these monthly fires that we host. And the next one is tomorrow. You're all invited. It's from 6 to 8 p.m. at Abrams Arts Center. And we also work with an activating structure called the Branch of Knowledge. And this branch is dedicated to Lenape return. So one of the most amazing things that happened with our work with Branch of Knowledge last year was that River Widow, who's our community organizer, worked alongside matriarchs from all of the Lenape nations. So the Delaware tribe, the Delaware Nation, the Stockbridge Munsee community, as well as the reserves in Canada. And River gathered matriarchs from all of these sovereign nations to get together and to talk about what they wanted to do. And they were very clear, they wanted to come back to their homelands. So we made that happen together. We worked for, we'll be going on 8 months. To plan that trip, to organize that trip, to fundraise for that trip. And back in, I think it was November, this group of 14 matriarchs from all of the Lenape nations came here to Lenape for their first trip to get back to their homelands. They brought the kids, they brought their grandkids. We had a feast together in the local community. They joined us on stage with the meeting. We had talks and conversations, strategic meetings to make sure that return would continue. They visited places that they needed to visit. We harvested corn and tobacco from a community garden. And this group has now continued to organize together and exist as Lenny Lenape Playbook, which you can follow on Instagram. They're making their second return to their homelands next week. So it's amazing when we build these spaces for return. This is land back, and this allows for the building of up on Haudenosaunee lands. We are in the midst of creating Build and Rebuild Now, which is a land-based project focused on physical reclamation of land and space for Indigenous, Black, Latinx, and other artists and activists of color. It's going to be a place for rebuilding, and it will offer space for making, for rest, for recuperation, for skill sharing, and for sustenance. It's 42 acres, 36 acres will be protected forest. 6 acres is currently being repatriated from its 35 years of serving as cow pasture to native forest and a sustainable garden and medicine and food garden. And it's also a 4-story barn, which will be refurbished to hold all of the rebuilding activations for all of the artists, activists, and makers who will be welcomed to the space in the near future. And so maybe a next local context summit could be held at Build and Rebuild Now. It's beautiful. And I want to say how lucky are we today to be together in this room. I'm a huge fan of all of the speakers and knowledge makers and generators of today. And I'm really in awe of all of the futures that you are all individually and collectively making in the present. Your work is so deeply a lot of listening today. So maybe for a second, if you'd like, you take a deep breath together. You can close your eyes if you'd like. Take that deep breath in a way that you can encourage that breath to enter every single one of your cells. Easily exhaling, preparing yourself for what you will experience and share today. And that's really all we need to do. experience and share this work. There's a word in Yuchtan which I'll share with you, which is Yichukni, which means pay attention. So I like to think of listening in this way. Pay attention with all of yourselves, with all of your senses. Pay attention to everything that's around you, both physically, the known, unknown, but also what is around you in terms of lineages, of knowledge, and of ancestors, and futures of sovereignness. I turn this over to Corey and Felicia and Monique, and just introduce yourselves in the way that's good for you, and I'll be back at 11:50 to help guide some questions and closing text. Yeah.
Quickly, if I'm speaking too quietly, so just wave at me and I'll try and speak up a bit. But just wanted to introduce myself really quickly. Corey's better at the slide, but I'll just keep talking without clicking. I'm Felicia Garcia, smallest Shumash. My homelands are in Southern California. I'm really blessed to be able to call my own homelands home these days. In the top right corner is our sacred mountain, Awataponush, and that's actually what it looks like right now, just covered in beautiful wildflowers and poppies. So I just like to ground myself by giving my gratitude to my own community, my ancestors, my family. On the bottom right is my mom, my grandma. That's at my NYU graduation here in Lenape-Hoking. I attended the master's program at NYU, which is how I became connected with Jane, Corey, the rest of his team, and started to become involved in this incredible work. And I also like to pay tribute to the Tewa people. Ogopoge Awinge is pictured on the bottom left, and up until the last few months, I lived in Tewa territory, Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I just really like to show my gratitude for the time I spent as a guest in those lands. I work for Local Context as the community outreach manager, and I'm really excited to be here with you today and to share a bit about the work that I've been really privileged to do with this incredible team.
So hi everyone here. Thank you so much for coming. And also hello everybody who's watching the live stream or the recording. We really appreciate you taking the time and space to be with us today. My name is Corey Grell. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a settler. I normally live in what is today known as Connecticut, often during Cognizant lands. I'm very lucky and grateful to be here on Lenape-Hoking with you today. This map shows the Indigenous lands that I've lived on throughout my life. Like Felicia, I went to NYU STEM studies. For that, I went to University of Vermont for undergraduate, and I'm originally from Connecticut as well. And these are some pictures of where I currently live and my dog. But we really wanted to kick off the summit with highlighting some of the incredible ongoing work that's been going on by folks who couldn't be here today, because we're going to hear from a lot of folks who are doing really incredible work today. But not everyone can be with us today, as Jane mentioned. Our friends in Asparoa are hopefully sleeping right now, and just thinking about sharing this incredible work that's been going on. So we are also going to show this map of our outreach network, our outreach efforts. Each pin represents folks at various stages of their journeys with local context, but you can see it's quite a large, wide-reaching group, and it's growing. And as Jane mentioned, we're developing outreach strategies in areas that maybe aren't as represented by this map, so it's going to continue to grow. I'm really excited about that.
In addition to the individualized outreach that we do with each community, institution, researcher that was represented by a pin on the map we just shared, with support from the Mellon Foundation and University of Waikato, we have been able to offer 2 small intensive training programs There's some photos from these programs here on the screen. And each of these trainings was specifically for Indigenous community members. The first took place here in Lenape-Hoking in August of 2022, and Monique was in attendance. It was so great to have her and some other really amazing folks there. And the second was held in Ontario in February of this year. We've had over 50 people from around the world participate in these programs, including Indigenous community members, leaders, tribal historic preservation officers, archivists, collections managers, students, researchers, and so much more. And these programs were developed to equip participants with the tools to support Indigenous communities, institutions, and in Indigenous cultural and intellectual property, as well as Indigenous data sovereignty. We also equipped participants with tools to be able to utilize and share about the traditional knowledge about cultural labels, the notices, the local context hub, and ethical collaboration. So I'm sure we'll have more training programs in the future, and we're excited to share more about this incredible network that just continues to grow.
So in addition to our large network, we have some specific networks that we've created to support different groups of people within the local context community. So we have 3 working groups or networks on the left that meet semi-regularly online. And they're really about being a place to support each other, to learn from each other, and to knowledge share. So we have a group for Indigenous community members, a group for cultural institution staff, and a technical implementation working group. And we're very grateful for the folks who have helped make these groups happen. We've also started to have some regional groups. So we have a group in New Mexico as well as Hawaii that are getting started. And we're hoping to see more of those kind of regional support networks as well.
All right, so I'm going to share pretty briefly about some of the communities that I've had the pleasure of working with, and I wish we could spend more time, but I'll just share some quick highlights. You know, there's going to be some other great examples shared throughout the day, and so I wanted to talk a bit about some that you might not have heard about before. So the first I wanted to mention is the Jajawaram Clan Aboriginal Corporation. They've developed this project that combines the cultural knowledge with modern agricultural technology and research to develop methods to grow large-scale kangaroo grass. So I'll just be sharing very briefly. We don't have any images for some of these examples just yet. We've also been working with the California Indian Museum and Cultural Center, which primarily represents Pomo and Miwok communities. And they developed labels a number of years ago. They've been working with Mukurtu, but Corey and I have been meeting with them to support their transition onto the local context hub. I also wanted to mention the Dolphin Head Forest Preserve, which is developing an interactive story map project in partnership with our Storybridge. And Rahe Wanyantanama was planning to be here today. She might join later, but she will also be sharing about this work at the upcoming Native American and Indigenous Research Study Association conference, which is happening, I think, beginning tomorrow in Toronto. So if any of you are headed up that way, be sure to check out Rahe's presentation. And then lastly, I wanted to mention the Pawnee Nation, who Corey and I just met with, and they already have labels established in Mukurtu, and so we're working with them to again transition onto the local context hub and support their development of cultural sensitivity protocols. And then we have a couple of more detailed examples that we wanted to share. This is the Wo'ohyante project, which was developed to rematriate Dakota and Lakota language recordings from institutions around the world and make them accessible to language learners via this interactive, searchable, and culturally sensitive website. We're currently working with community representatives to support their customization and implementation of the languages using the hub. And this is just a mock-up. It's not live on their site just yet. But we are working with Elliot Bannister, who is a language specialist with the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. And they also participated in our training in August. But this is just a great example of a story that was told by Ella Cara-Deloria. And you can see under the image on the right side, under the object description, that this particular story or the recording and then the written version on the right side are held by the University of California. But the Standing Rock Sioux tribe plans to implement the traditional knowledge labels under the rights and licensing field on this site. And this particular story has the TK seasonal label. I don't want to go too into detail just to be respectful of that, but I just thought it was a great example of the potential use of the labels. And then another quick example, I wanted to highlight this project, Yureo Noku, my language that was developed to share the unique languages, stories, and cultures of Cook Island communities. Corey and I learned about this project through Tapujukura Vea and Samson Samsonine, who worked with 10 Cook Island communities to create short videos to act as a resource for community members who are interested in learning more about their language and culture. So Tabutu and Samson worked with community members to support their customization of the labels, and they implemented the labels both when they're applicable on screen as the participants are speaking, and then in the credits as well. Wish I could share more with you about some of the work we've been doing, but I'll just leave it at that for now and pass it on to Corey.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm going to highlight a couple of institutions, but this is kind of a crossover between the institution. Really amazing efforts that have been going on in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So this is Manaki Whānau Land Care Research, which is a research institution based in New Zealand. We kind of talk at length in other places about this, and we're happy to share those resources, but we really wanted to give a huge shout out because of the incredible work. Manaki Whānau has added BC notice to every single one of their 670,000 records using Local Context Hub and API. It's really, really impressive. But also using the API, Krakatoa, Taranaki, and Te Rororo have added their labels to specimens that have been collected from their lands. And that's about 6,000 labels. So really impressive work that we just wanted to shout out really quickly. So I'll talk about the institutions, a couple quick highlights. Again, you're going to hear from other folks later today. But just to start us off, the University of Queensland in Australia has added some notices to their eSpace, which is their institutional repository, which is really amazing to see. The Newfields Museum, which is the Indianapolis Museum of Art, they've received a grant from the IMLS to redesign their online collections. Just yesterday, they actually presented with these mock-ups, and we're really grateful that they were able to share these with us to show what the label, the notices are going to look like in their new online database. And you can also see, so they're using EMU. You can see that they've been adding the notices here in our rights module, which is really exciting. I'm really grateful to be seeing this work. Another quick highlight, the Welcome Collection based in London. The Welcome Collection, along with the University of Kent and Dinan College Library and ASU, they've been a part of a 12-month initiative funded by the NEH, as well as the UK's Research and Innovation Arts and Humanities Research Council. And they have been working on developing a reciprocal approach to some type of mindful access to Indigenous materials that exist outside of Indigenous communities. So we've been seeing some really great thought come out of that. They've also added these two notices, open to collaborate and actually incomplete, to this page on their website. So really amazing work there. Forticon is an open source photographic archive. Forticon.us has added the notices into their infrastructure so that any of their users can actually add notices. They've added a selection of the attribution complete and TK notices to select records in their site. And a really exciting recent example, the Maine State Archives, our first state archives to join the Local Context Hub. They've added an open collaborate notice to a couple of different websites. We're really excited to be seeing this work taking off. They're also using the archive space plugin, which you'll hear about in a little bit. We think that they're the first to use the plugin to add the notices and labels to their site. Then we'll stop there. So you hear from the other leading speakers here today. We are on social media. Would love to give us a follow. But thank you so much. And Monique, we're gonna pass it over to you to introduce yourself. And here's your slides. Of course.
Well, Siwa, Moinintendo Indigenous Lenape Aki, aka Lenape Oke, Nionjai. Hello, everybody. My name is Moinintendo. I am the Director of Cultural Affairs for the Stockbridge Muncie Band of Mohegans. And my community, we are located today in north central Wisconsin. So we are Muncie speaking Lenape peoples. And that is like one of the three historic dialects of the Lenape people. There are two that are spoken today, one being Lenami, that's where Lenape Hoki pronunciation comes from Muncie for my people, is Lenape Aki. So there are those two living dialects, not 13 dialects of the Lenape. If you know that pop culture reference, if not, please check out Ghosts. It's a really good episode. So I just wanted to share with you all just a quick overview of our story and why we are where our traditional homelands are. And this isn't representing the Stockbridge Muncie peoples, but also our northern relatives, the Muncie, Delaware, and Muncie First Nations in southwestern Ontario, who I want to acknowledge for their gratitude, their generosity in assisting my community with revitalizing the Muncie language. And so we see here in the red is Mohican homelands, and like to the south is like Muncie homelands. And we have here the different removals that took place that my tribal community had experienced. And so like with a lot of our work, even though with us being in Wisconsin, we still do work here in our homelands. And even despite like those series of removals, we have always returned back to our homelands, whether it's to do work as representatives for our nation, ensuring that our treaties are upheld and acknowledged, and then also to maintain our connection to our lands and to gather up any other remaining tribal peoples who were still out in the homelands to gather them with us so that they could stay with our nation. So the Cultural Affairs Department has three different program areas, one being historic preservation, language, and the library museum, which is where I am stationed at. I come from a museum studies background. Did my undergrad at Institute of American Indian Arts and then in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and then my master's at Gulcher through their cultural sustainability program. And so during that time is when we started implementing Nukatu, and that's where we became introduced to the traditional knowledge label. So this is like one project that we have that is we are a project partner on with Wisconsin Library Services, who's the Midwest Nukatu Hub, and it's through an IMLS grant that we were able to take a lot of our digitized family photographs and get them uploaded into Nukatu through the assistance of the Tribal Libraries, Archives, and Museums course at UW-Madison's High School. And the reason why this project is very important is because we're going to be working with the community to verify that everybody who's identified in these photographs in our catalog, that it is valid and that we have the opportunity to make any corrections. And then also if any of the families want to share any cultural narratives or oral histories connected to their families, the individuals in the photographs, we can record that as well. So we've been starting to implement some of the TK labels in that way. So here we have selected 4 TK labels for this project. So right now we have the community voices because we want to encourage the tribal community to share content with the collections. And right now we have non-verified because we haven't spoken to the family yet. So once we've spoken to those families and we're able to get everything vetted, then we can use the verified label. And then also we have here non-commercial, and then we also have the community's TK label. And a lot of our work is within Mukatu and the local and the TK labels is informed by our traditional governance, which is like station. So that's like where this really embodies the value of respect. And then another counselor role was the runner. So that's where we have responsibility was their core value. We have hero, which embodies that reciprocity. And then we also have the owl, which was also the person who was in charge of ensuring that the knowledge of our people was kept and those protocols were kept as well, and they built those relationships. And then this photograph here is actually for tribal members. They were all students of the Carlisle Industrial School. And the young lady in the lower right-hand corner was my great-grandmother, Pauline Peters, who was a survivor of Carlisle Indian School. Another way that we're using the TK labels is for public education in our homelands. So this is an example of a panel that was recently installed at the Williams Historical Society. And we use the TK labels, non-commercial and outreach, because that's one thing we always want to ensure is that when we're sharing our knowledge, our information about our histories, our people, the work that we're doing, we want to ensure that people understand this is for outreach purposes, and it's not to be commercialized, it's not to be, no one is to profit off of that. And so this is some of the work that we've been doing in our homelands. Previously, this small historical society had some content about Native peoples, but it wasn't very accurate and was quite offensive, and some of it could be comedic. As far as like the way they described us, like one reference was that they stated that we walked in single files as if we were ants. So and we really wanted to like get that laminated it's great material. Not only we all have creatives and writers, which they could definitely make a few episodes out of that. But you know, but it mysteriously disappeared. So yes, this is some of like the wonderful work that we've been doing, and then like looking at like how we can use the TK labels just to engage with the public. So other ways that we're looking at using TK labels is land acknowledgements. So this is an example of a land acknowledgement that was previously approved by our tribe, but then later on there was a corporation that came in and inserted themselves into the acknowledgement, and we didn't know about it. Like the staff at the Land Conservancy didn't know what to do. They were just trying to do their best, and so we found out through one of the locals who was using the trails, and they knew who we were. You know, they knew to contact our historic preservation officer, and then who alerted me. So we were able to get that corrected as well. So that's one thing, is like looking at, well, can the TK labels be used in real life? Can they be a sticker and be used as a form of activism and corrections? So like if this was a land acknowledgement that someone's seen and knew that the information on it wasn't correct, could they just slap up a non-verified TK label with the QR code? So, you know, that's like some of the things that we've been kind of entertaining here. So This is an example of a handout card that was part of a traditional plant garden that was installed at the Stockbridge Mission House in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. We have ongoing partnerships with the trustees who have like different historic sites that they manage. And so with one of our community members who works with the ethnobotany of our tribe wanted to share like some of our base plants and how some of the history behind it. So here we have like Joe Pyeweed. And on the printed handout cards, we included those TK labels down there, you know, and we also included that there's multiple communities because we're referencing some Anishinaabe knowledge that we found that was documented about some of what the Joe Pyeweed could be referring to in their language. And that's one thing, like with the Anishinaabe and Ojibwe, they're Algonquin speaking people, so we come from the same language family. So a lot of our words are kind of similar, and how our language is built is similar to it, even with some of the descriptions of like certain words are sometimes they're identical. And that just goes back to this whole ancestral knowledge of this world history about us all being like one great nation, talking about all the Algonquin language speaking peoples. And of course, we have the non-commercial, and that this is for outreach purposes only. And then looking forward, seeing ways that we can include some of those biocultural labels as well. And that concludes my presentation. When we'll end it. Thank you, Monique.
So next we're going to be hearing from Danny Peru and Takapau Cabral, who are from Pakatoga Nation in Afro New Zealand. So we're going to start doing that here.
This is a presentation that I was asked to do for you all, and it's a privilege. It's definitely a privilege, and I just want to do a bit of a mini. So I just want to thank Jane for allowing this to be possible. Traditional knowledge labels back then here. It's a big kaupapa here in Whakapō here, and I just want to do a big mihi to you, Jane, and your role, your group, who were able to find a succession plan in regards to protecting the Indigenous rights of our taonga, protecting Indigenous people's taonga. And without the mahi that you did, the research that you did alongside with your group, it wouldn't have been possible today. So I just wanted to do a big mihi, and it was lovely to meet you, Tina, to be able to sit there and listen to you, and the passion and drive that you had for this kaupapa was just astounding, and I loved it. I could see how much aroha you had for Indigenous people and their rights, and e kore uti nami kia koe me tō rōpu e kahana ki te āwhina kia koe. Also to you, Maui, kare mutu nami kia koe mo tō whakapaukaha ki te mahi, ngā mahi mo te whakatōhia o te rate iwi whānui. Nā reira, tēnei te mihi ana kia. Koutou katoa. I do want to mihi to a good friend of mine who was also part of the traditional labels, and her name was Tony Papuni. She was pretty much the drive behind all of this before I had come along. And I do want to thank her as well. She was a very great motivator in regards to learning the IP, learning traditional labels, creating a lot of one, and making sure our people are aware of what those labels look like and how it benefits us. Now this wonderful man right here is Danny Peru. He's our cultural advisor manager. He is from Whakapohia also, Te Whānau Apane. He is a great man. Like Maui, their minds are just amazing, and I could not thank him enough for the amount of work that he puts into in regards to the traditional lands in the local context hub, the research that he has done amongst the Kōti Tāpuni and Rangimagia to make sure that we meet the targets that we set out when this project was given to, and all those lovely people in that photo that you can see is who work under them. And the guys in the hoods, they are the Tiaki Taio crew, and they look after our environment. Tiaki meaning care, Taio meaning environment. So Tiaki Taio, so they do a lot around the tripping, possums, going up into the bush, having a look at our natives and making sure those are okay, collecting frogs, a lot of stuff, everything to do around environmental. And we use the biocultural labels. If we need to, at the moment I haven't been able to use those, but Maui has, and I'm sure Maui will be able to elaborate a little bit more about use that. And this is me. Okay, I'm Monday, and my role here is the traditional knowledge of labels and Tiaki Taio. Area home on two, we're looking at and there's a little bit of a whakamama around the traditional labels and from the those of you who don't know, but I'm pretty sure you all do know, they're just digital markers for Indigenous communities to add local protocols for access and the use. Because everybody has reasons as to why we are marking them for their taonga. So, who are we for Waimaka? We are the iwi development team, and I suppose our purpose was to reinvigorate the cultural language and identity. And I guess it's to understand where our taonga sits and how it's cared for and how we access our taonga in regards to making sure that we can label them properly for our people to be able to use them. So we are based at Tini Paua, and we also work under the Whakatohia Trust. Right, so this slide in whānau is around the digital library space. So with the traditional knowledge process, we also wanted to create a digital library so it was easier access for our whānau here in Whakatohia to be able to gain our taonga through other institutions. So by having a link connected through our digital library space, we'll be able to be connected to Ngā Taonga and any other institutions that do have our taongas will be readily and easily accessed for our whānau through our digital library. We received some funding just last year in regards to be able to create this space, and working alongside University of Waikato, we are hoping to be able to launch that around Mapiniki time this year in July. So yes, there's a good space to be a part of, and it's getting worked on now. It's a safe space for our whānau to be able to have access to the digital library for all our treasures from Whakatohia. Whakatohia, so YTK labels, it puts our voice and Whakatohia on all our taonga information and knowledge. It reconnects our people to Whakatohia taonga and Mātauranga currently sitting outside of our rohe. It also allows us with Whakatohia to adapt to our needs and student safety with institutions. And going off that, there's a wonderful woman named Shan who was a big driver in this takeover, who connected us with the correct people in regards to repatriating our taonga for Whakatohia. So a big mihi to her, and also in regards to helping us, connecting us with the right people inside Aotearoa as well as outside of Aotearoa. What have we used? Sign language. Now, sign language was created. Courtney had Māori were part of the space, and they were trying to create some sort of system on how it was easy to teach traditional labels a different way to other people, especially those who Hearing impaired. So sign language was one way of being able to teach traditional knowledge labels and what that looks like for those who can't hear. And Malia was one of the lovely women who was able to help in that part in creating a sign language for every single language that we had. Also, there was one that set out for the iwi to be able to come in and learn with Courtney, who did a week in wānanga for everybody to come in, and she created games around IP, basic IP, and what that looked like, copyrights also, and again, the traditional labels and how we can apply it and how important it is for us to be able to have a system for whakatōria. Number 3, for and how we put the relationships with institutions. Again, we need to thank Sean and everybody else behind the scenes who were able to connect us to the right people, from University of Waikato, the libraries, the museums, the archives, the papa, that was a big component that they spoke of as well. Just the relationships that we get to have with the institutions. Also, the scope, how big the scope of it is in terms of reconnecting to our whānau that isn't currently under our whānau. Again, this is where we go back to how important it is that we research and find the whānau that belongs to whakatōria, and making sure that our people are aware that it's actually out there, because there's a lot of whānau out there that they don't even realise that it's actually, that they don't realise is there. So, then the labels application process, we receive the item. So it's added to the master metadata sheet, then it goes to the digital library, and then the asset to the metadata. So we read the description, provide feedback, if any, to the whānau institution. So if we get that tonga and we're not quite sure about it, we'll go back to the original source and just say, hey, where does this come from? Why was it created? Or who do we talk to make sure that the information that we have received is correct? Then we add any other comments or information that is required for that tonga. And the local context hub, we are creating a new project. And then from there, we apply the label, editor, admin, make any necessary edits during to the approval process. We await approval from the admin. Then I come along and I apply that label, and but that's after having a bit of a chat with my crew here. So we will get together maybe on a Monday, and we'll get together on a Monday, and if I have received any sort of tonga, we all have a bit of a talk about it, what that looks like, what the labels may look like, and what the creator or the original source of that tonga has requested in regards to what type of label should be on it. We get a notifications to institutions, so we send it out to the institutions and say, hey, this has been applied. The institutions get that information, and then the fourth process, the monthly report put to the advisory committee, overview on projects, label supply, terms of reference. So this is just a bit of what I've been done. Master copy looks like. So it has the institution ID, the reference ID, the document of what it is. It has the type of the document, the tonga, the treasure, the description of what that tonga is all about, and what kind of source it is. So it could be a book, it could be a audio, a video, an image, depending on what that is. It also has the link as well, the link that's titled to that tonga and where it comes from. And this is just a little bit of the library, and that's exciting. It's exciting for Whakatōria. It's exciting for those who are creating this for our people in Whakatōria. And as you can see, there's just a little bit of a, what would you call this? there's a snippet of what's in there, so Volna, it would have come from the local context hub, would have come from our metadata, the main metadata sheet. And at the bottom of that, you would see the labels that have been attached to that website. And I just wanted to share with you all our whakatohia waiata digital app that we have, and it is amazing. So every single waiata that has been created here in whakatohia or written by great whakapis in whakatohia is based on this waiata app that was created before I started here, and it has been done through Whai Leader, Courtney, Nani Māori, Danny, and I just want to thank them for this resource, and I'm sure that Evie would be proud to have this resource as well, to make sure, because it has the description of what the waiata is about, and it has the words that are correct for each waiata. You can even listen to it to make sure you've got the right, we call it rangi or taki, the right beat and tune for the waiata. Each waiata is different on here, and it's beautiful to see. Also, you can see that they all have been labelled and how you can use those waiata. So you can't just go out there and see them anywhere. The label will advise you on what you can use the waiata for. And the nuinga on the waiata, you can use it for educational purposes. But some waiata you can't just pick up and just go and see it anywhere. Like, you wouldn't sing a particular mōteatea, which is in our whakatohia waiata in a different town, like New York. Depending on the whai kōrero, I suppose. But that's something else Māori can elaborate. Hey Māori, you're welcome. Otherwise, these are situations here. The University of Waikato, the GT that we are going to trust for the Kumbia based on that, and the digital library for the Whakatiri, the Pauna digital library. I just want to do a big mihi to everybody who is sitting there in New York. I wish I was there, but I'm not. But enjoy Maui. Thank you, and it's been a pleasure to be able to do this. This is so hard for me, but I do thank you all, Jane, Maui, Jane and her crew, Maui and us, and Sean is another big person who has helped us get through and making sure this project is useful in Whakatohia and how useful it is, and it's going to be carrying on for years to come. So thank you very much. Atu I tēnā, e mihi ana te katoa katoa ko rui mai I tēnei rā. Hakite.
Thank you, Tasmaro. Darren and Crystal, we're going to have you come up next. Darren, you're going to be speaking next. Thank you all.
With a deal was with. Good morning, everyone. My name is Darren Ranko. I'm an observation citizen, chair of the learning programs at the University of Maine. And I really want to know how to put a circle into the PowerPoint. Learning lots of things. So I want to talk about some of the work that we're doing in the context of the University of Maine and in my homeland, so the University of Maine become quite clear it's in Penobscot Nation homelands, and I live and work in my own territory, which is quite a blessing. We're going to talk about memorandum of understanding, MOUs, memoranda of understanding. I was a classics major, so I conjugate memorandum. So I do want to give a context for this work in our territory. Jane and her crew are frequent visitors to our homelands and across the Wabanaki territory, and just to give you a sense of our tribal locations in terms of the seats of our governments, sort of our communities are centered in what is now Maine, but as Wabanaki folks, we are connected across the border and see our territory as extending into now Eastern Canada as well. And I bring about this slide, of course, you never know like how slides are gonna present, but believe me when I say that on this map you see on Marsh Island, which is the central piece of the island there, in the bottom part where the University of Maine is located, and the next island up the Penobscot River is Indian Island or People's Island, just how close we are at the University of Maine, and Marsh Island actually is the center of our traditional village site that actually is it's on the other end from where the university of our traditional village site is on the other end from where the university is located. But this is really the core elements of our territory is where the University of Maine is located. Another framework to understand where we're at is that Marsh Island is what's up Skeg and Menahan, or Slippery Ledge, or at the Slippery Ledges Island, and that's referring to and my friend and colleague and co-conspirator James Francis, who hopefully will be here later on. Did he make the plane? Yeah, so he had another speaking engagement, but he's sorry, I have this on the timer to remind me to go quickly. Clearly, I'm technology snowmaster of but another way that we think about our territory is its work reflects these connections through, we see it through the upriver orientation and the canoe and all sorts of other things. So this slippery ledge is critical to our navigation in our homeland, in our sacred river. So, okay, MOU. I just want to locate like where am I from? Yeah. In May of 2018, outgoing president of the University of Maine, Sue Hunter, signed an MOU with our chief, who's still our chief, Kirk Francis, which is related to the cultural heritage items and TK labels to become clear. But this, of course, came at the end of a process, right? You don't start with an MOU, and the level of specificity in this MOU reflects nearly a decade's worth of work, probably more actually in terms of the museum work, because I think Jen, like Gretchen, has been at the forefront of this in our museum for decades, really reaching out and engaging with our tribal citizens to think about the caretaking roles that she has in a university museum. So probably 20 years in the making. The purpose of the MOU is to think about, and I'll have more a slide about this, but this sort of collaboration developing over the management of Penobscot cultural heritage over, I said 10 years, 20 years. This work comes from tribal nation collaboration over many years, broad institutional priorities to center Indigenous research, clearly identified roles and responsibilities, university recognition, and tribal nation data sovereignty and decolonization benefits all of us. So that was a pitch. I returned to my homelands in 2009 they hired me. It was one of those situations where I was talking to the provost at the university at the time, and she's like, why isn't there more collaboration where we have, students, but we're so close? And she'd been at the University of Minnesota Duluth, and I was like, well, if you want to do this, in a better way, you need to do X, Y, and Z things, and sort of, it was like writing my job description. So don't ever answer those questions, honestly. That'll really mess you up for a whole life. Okay. So this, and I call this a new model of collaboration because we identify that in the MOU as it's where the Penobscot Nation University Maine is seeing together our roles and responsibilities, our caretaking roles in particular around these cultural heritage items that are controlled by the University of Maine on some level, although the point of the MOU is so the university will have less control and will have more control as decolonization efforts work. So it really was to integrate Penobscot voice perspectives in the university process needs and collections. And it also recognizes that the university has a responsibility to work with my tribe of Penobscot Nation through our Tribal Rights and Resource Protection Board, which we affectionately call the Perturbed Board. I don't know, it doesn't, it's probably why it doesn't meet very often. It's a floating thing. But this is where the interface between the university and the tribe, and so all of us on this board are tribal citizens. It's a function or sort of appointed by our tribal council, so it's a part of our tribal government, but it has as its purpose of organizing this work for our nation. The MOU itself addresses 5 different areas of concern. The first is IRBs. I'm going to talk about the care and management of our collections in the museum and in the library in more detail. But there's also part of this is the University of Maine Press, where intellectual property things are inhabited, as well as archaeological collections held in the anthropology department. And I can go on about the IRB stuff too. The shorthand of that is that in this agreement, there is a Penobscot Nation representative on the University of Maine IRB. That person happens to be me. It doesn't have to be me. It's just that like you're already over there. And it's just I love university meetings, like if they're on soon, can we do that more? My question. Okay, so the Hudson Museum here in this part, and these are, this is very much like written. And Jane wrote, I don't know, 80% of it. I wrote like 15% of it, and 5% was, blue stuff, I guess. But the idea that we really wanted to identify key roles and responsibilities in this kind of MOU, providing a permanent Wabanaki seat on the Hudson Museum Board of Directors, informing the policies and management, and this is again. Gretchen Faulkner is the director of the Hudson Museum on our campus. It's an anthropological museum, and like a lot of university museums, has like the most random collection that you could possibly imagine. People traveling the world, a feature of this collection, though, is a very purposeful collection that has been in collaboration with Maine Indian Basket Lines and a whole host of other Indigenous organizations locally. Also manages a really important collection of art materials as well as people and actually houses collections that are not owned by the university or the museum, but it serves of tribal partners. But this also serves the TK label approach, collaboration around the documentation, cataloging, digital sharing of the collections, and establishment of TK labels at the Hudson as well. Here at the library, and you can see at the same time as the MOU, we also finalized wording on our land acknowledgement, and also finalized a signage, a bilingual signage project for campus. So it was, a lot of us are suspicious of land acknowledgements, or increasingly so. Before we did that at the University of Maine, I wanted structural shifts around authorities and knowledge. So that involved the signage work as well as assembly. So the idea that we wouldn't really let people say a land acknowledgement and feel good about it until there was actually shifting authorities that were really purposeful. But somehow in May of 2018, God, I'm so glad it wasn't 2 years later. That would have been harder to the pandemic. So here in the library, the library special collections has a lot of materials, and they benefited from a whole series of even more extractive kinds of work connected to our tribes and in what is now Maine. But really, again, we wanted to impact, a new model of co-curation, making that as the goal, inclusive decision-making, permission over use and circulation. The Penobscot cultural materials. And in the document in the MOU, there is a sort of, and this, you see this in other agreements that Jane is and local contacts have been a part of, where if something is labeled as culturally sensitive, so beyond any sort of legal ramifications, we have this kind of category of culturally sensitive items that if they circulate, that we as the tribes see as potentially harmful if they're uncirculated, so we can put a stop to circulation. This includes material loans from the Hudson, as well as materials from special collections, which there are a number of important linguistic documents and all sorts of other things. So this is also where the TK labels are play. Again, the anthropology department, and we're lucky enough to have the Penobscot Nation citizen as the archaeologist for the region, Bonnie Newsom, who knows his collection. It's if anyone knows anything about archaeology at universities, that people are constantly training students and they have materials in the department. They're often not very well cataloged or communicated, unlike museums, which because of things like NAGPRA, it had to be more. I mean, they've ignored NAGPRA, but that's it. But the idea that they got to the public departments where there's like collections, no one's really sure about what their status is. And we really wanted to identify those items in this collection as potential resources for our tribe. Bonnie also happens to have previously been our tribal historic preservation officer. And so this connect again, we're so close. This is a very unusual kind of situation. We wanted to identify that. And I'm going to stop there. We're going to talk more this afternoon about work that we're doing related to biocultural notices and other partnerships we have with the tribes. There's all sorts of other works. So it wasn't too long, and I got in a few later. Thank you.
Yeah, that's
Ja, als Erbin, in der Schiene steht so eine kleine So thank you so much for the time you've taken, the welcome, and also just to give a little bit of background. My profession is as a medicines, which is Centers for infection violence. And actually, grounding is at first in the wet lab, studying flowers, pathogen cells, and realizing I even had a couple of patents of my own, and in the targeted chemotherapeutic space that cancer biology is so attractive. And I realized that I didn't ever want to set up one lab forever again. I didn't want to ever become a scientist because Native people believe if we're ever called up with higher education, our paths are usually as doctor, lawyer, engineer, teacher, or never as a scientist. And then I went back for my first master's in bioethics, studying universities and indigenous communities, and realized, wow, genomics is even worse than cancer biology. And particularly in population genetics. And I did my second master's in public health and biology and also PhD in genomics and health disparities at Vanderbilt University, which is the best and the worst place to get that kind of training, just because, you know, great in terms of computational emergence relates to genetics and genomics. Horrible because there are no indigenous nations. So if I want to do community engaged work with genetics and genomics, really not a great space for it, really wasn't the time for it. So now we're getting into an interesting part where now we have the largest cadre and cohort of indigenous geneticists and scientists to actually be able to create benefit and beneficial impacts in this space. And if only we could just sleep a little. So if I could just briefly touch upon, you know, we always think about the terms discoveries in terms of science. The doctrine of discovery, preempted and gave rights for two European nations, superseding authority over us farmers and our lands and everything on it. And the US Supreme Court, throughout its from its inception to where even in 2005 and 2007, US Supreme Court actually utilized the doctrine of discovery to disenfranchise indigenous peoples of their lands and resources. Most recently used to disenfranchise United Nations plans. And even when the Pope sort of repudiated this past, First Nations and Indigenous nations everywhere were like, really, where's our land back? Where's it due back? Where's everything that you take from it back? And it's really interesting to think about in terms of genomic discoveries, that now this notion of uncovering hidden genetic variation, those types of research questions are also grounded and require the incorporation of indigenous peoples first and foremost. And then if you see the cycle of extraction and biocolonialism and biopiracy over and over again, but we also see it in our natural history collection. So I'm in usually the human space. Sometimes I go into the non-human space just because these questions of data collection, data harmonizations, data usage, right, are just less regulated in the non-human space. So we're going to be approaching these questions quicker. So in this kind of context, I love going to large sequencing centers like the Center for Biology, the Brown University Genomics in Guelph. Thank you for that invite. Just telling scientists, hey, you're helping yourself to knowledges that are not yours. And we see it plastered over and over again in art, in giving and conferring expertise onto white scientists for knowledges that are effectively our people's. And we see this over and over again to the subjugation of our people, such that before settlers arrived, we had so much biodiversity in our spaces. Over 30,000 edible plants worldwide, yet our ecosystems are considered backwards or primitives. And it was further like just demonized on the advent of the Green Revolution, which was this white sort of savior notion that we were going to end hunger and worldwide famine. And yet what we see actually is just increased power inequities and well concentrated by corporations and big agriculture. And we see a loss of biodiversity and also increases in the greenhouse emissions to the detriment of our earth. And it's so interesting with CRISPR and gene editing approaches. We are now looking to indigenous peoples to rescue monoculture and rescue biodiversity. And indigenous knowledges and articles all over the world, our newspaper articles are calling our knowledges as key to that sustainability, which is so hypocritical to the narrative that was perpetuated onto us without our choice. So we see seeds and varietals of our people, of our Indian community members, which stewarded potato plants to be reintroduced and CRISPR back into monoculture for the benefits of those corporations. And this is so interesting because when we think about the Oprah of it all, the helping themselves to our genomic information, we can see it, this narrative over and over and over again in this open data era, this open access climate. It's like you get a genomic data set and you get a genomic data set. Look on your chairs, there's a data set belonging, coming from indigenous people. And unsurprisingly, nations around the world are responding to this and creating policies and exercising their sovereignty and their governances in order to restrict open data sharing. Now, this is this narrative now is that we are anti-progress. We as indigenous scientists, indigenous people are anti-science, but we're not anti to that type of work. We're anti to the extraction, we're anti to the colonialism, we're anti to this story that we can see unfold cyclically ahead of us if we don't do anything. Because now over 80% of the world's biodiversity is on lands that are stewarded by indigenous peoples. So the next genetic discoveries are going to co-opt our knowledges and disenfranchise tribal people's rights. And we're often the last with benefits, and we're often the least protected from competing. So when we think about this collection of data, we always ask, who is this benefiting? There have been tons of stories over and over again of scientists having a copy into our communities and taking our blood and our DNA, have promising medicines and therapeutics to cure the conditions that are afflicting our peoples. Just this narrative came from point A to point C is never actually like, there's really no steps in it. And I asked scientists over and over again, how are we ensuring that the benefits are impacting the people directly? And always their response to us our domain. Like our responsibility is publishing that next little step in a peer-reviewed publication that no subcommittee member could read, that's outside our disciplines, beyond paywalls, and then somehow, somewhere down the line, that's going to translate to benefits through therapeutics, through big pharma, or drugs that indigenous people in my opinion cannot afford. So we see then that the first entities to benefit are not the people that are giving that information to begin with, which is absolutely wrong from an ethical point of view. How purposes, I can say that that is not ethical, that is completely extractive and very colonial over and over again to white scientists. So, and how do we ensure that benefits, benefit us fairly little? Because I know that I'm going to think about their larger effect later on. But this is a scene, if you don't recognize it from the movie Despicable Me, with the pillars of the Lehman Brothers and constantly swishing us like the room walks on the way and speak alone. So I feel like if you're moving from left to right, if you indigenous peoples, the rightmost part of the city are feeling this switch. Because universities, through the Rainbow Act, can claim IP from federally funded research. And unsurprisingly, largely the teams be able to support their ability to claim that IP. Corporations have already, trashed them out. We already know they have our legal teams, but it's really interesting because as somebody that worked on the other side as an industry programmer, I can tell you that industry research is not as regulated as academic spaces. It's almost the Wild West of what you can get away with, unfortunately. But also, they can get access to public data sets through normalization, or they can have paper available on proprietary information. So, they're unilaterally benefiting from open data. And again, people are choosing to support that, but indigenous peoples. First of all, sometimes our existences are not even recognized by formal governments. Neither is our right to sovereignty or self-governance. The concept of ownership is already incongruent with how we function for millennia. It's kind of immemorial. And it's really hard to establish that requirement of novelty, especially for genetically associated indigenous knowledges that we have been practicing and utilized for centuries. So, and notwithstanding, it requires large legal teams. Some of our nations are so small that we're lucky to have even one or two tribal lawyers to come back to our communities. Now ask them to stack on their legal information, biology and IT. I'm like, that's a lot for one person to have mastery of. So now when we consider on the international level, so the Nagoya Protocol is a framework that formalizes fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from biological diversity. But it's also one that the US hasn't been signed on to, which is incredibly interesting. So of course, the question when we're talking about how do we actually think about return of benefits and samples in communities that are respectful to problems of this data, like how can we do this? How can we operationalize linguistic? How can we operationalize it? So one way is through having Indigenous led biological data repository. So this is the Native Biology Consortium, of which I'm a co-founder and also an ethics and policy director. It is a lab in central South Dakota, in a part of the Shawnee Sioux tribe. And we have been in operation since 2015, and now we have over 9 employees, and we've been able to introduce how we can put sequencing to a remote evolution for first time that we know in the US. When we are thinking about in terms of consent and broad consent, we know that we can change this, that we can do more effective forms of consent, more responsive community member states. So when we're thinking about data management and governance, so no track for lines, I think that we're thinking of now also including dynamic consenting, so that participants can actually have more tailored approaches to what types of studies their data is going to be used for, and it can change the preferences moving forward. And then we're talking about creating our own data servers to hold our own data. We now employ and stack on that machine learning approaches related to blockchain and federated learning, and have those rules, those execute rules now like on the level of community members themselves. So those rules written by community members themselves as opposed to some other entity. But then in terms of local context and what we can do with labels, we could start also thinking about putting labels on the provenance of the data to also tag those data with attribution and use rights alongside sequence data. And this is incredibly interesting when we think about these international consortia for collectivizing genomic information. The Earth Genome Project has a very lofty model of sequencing life for the future of life. But when I saw this as an Indigenous person, I'm like, oh, now they're helping themselves to our information, our Indigenous genomes, the genomes that we steward, but international scale, at a grandiose, egocentric, scale, and it's totally scary. So I'm really fortunate that I'm at Arizona State University, which is another story in itself, if you know the history of it, but also working with but now we have the ability to sort of wedge in our professional expertise that we have acquired in these colonial spaces. And now we can start sort of publishing in their spaces the practices and guidelines that they need to do. And everything just so that we can tell them, hey, you don't need another lawsuit. Hey, private natures are becoming more litigious and tracking more and more about where the data is coming from and how it's being used. Like, you need to be more respectful, but also, there are good researchers out there. There are, I know them, I know them personally, and by setting the groundwork, a foundational form of ethical practices, we can really move the field forward. And we start thinking about data as a resource. We can start thinking about building economies of locally trained people to actually steward the data locally, have more data experts, and we can think about now cloud infrastructures that are Indigenous held. And let's start also by thinking of our students. as those next leaders in data science. So this is the Digidata, which is a series of workshops that start with a number of other Indigenous data scientists. We are now in our third year, and we are doing a workshop this summer. But the questions of interest are those that are centered in Indigenous communities. We have one nation in Lower Nation territory talking about the use of metabarcoding in fisheries and waterways management, and then also Shakopee lands relating to CRISPRing and also gene editing and genetic modification. Really thinking about Indigenous peoples and diverse peoples to do selective breeding of these other forms of techniques. And we're really changing the narrative because we know that if we want to truly impact equity and innovation, we have to also think about progressing across 3 different axes, not just engagement equity, but also decision-making equity in terms of those data governance foundational rules and also benefit equity. And absent progress along any of the 3 of these axes, we're just in the wrong status quo. So thank you, and also we have stickers. That's my information.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone who's spoken to us. Thanks to everyone for being here. And we heard about labels and digital tools as activators change, and how much potential and how many possibilities there are with correct attributions and verification processes. Because we have just a few moments, about 15 minutes or so, just to open up into discussion or any questions about application of labels, collaborations, anything that you've heard from any of the speakers for all of you.
I would like to ask, how many universities or colleges are there with collections that belong to Indigenous peoples, with which there could be a similar initiative, an MOU between each other?
I'll take a gander at that. All of them.
Yeah.
Start there. I do think you know, and Crystal alluded to this sort of the frameworks that were set up earlier too are based around abstraction, and the university is a critical colonial tool for holding and keeping from, right? So, you know, those of us that do this work in the context of universities, it's the story I tell myself. It's like a manager at a mid-level paper company in Scranton. But that you know, so much of the initial steps are set, even like I know that they'll say no to the thing, right? So then you could be like, oh, how do we get to the yes part of this? Because it's just the practice and structure is set up around we have it now, and you know that's such a firm thing, and Crystal alluded to this. We'll talk about it, I think, this afternoon. They're invested in the collectivization of our knowledge towards, you know, away from us towards some general public somewhere for profit, and et cetera, et cetera. So, yet reversing that flow is threatening in ways that they don't even know yet. You know, it's like you ask, well, can we do it that way? Right? I'm sure you have some of these stories that they're like, well, what will, you know, like, you know, just the special collections librarian thinks the world is falling. You know, if I say like, you can't show that to anyone, she's like, well, my job is to show it to people. You know, like it's these are great people, they're ethical, they see themselves serving the public as by presenting information to as broad a public as possible. So there is this reorientation that you have to work with them along this way, and so it's such a tricky thing. So I guess I would do more of an explanation. I still want to say all of them, but I'd say there are other ways to answer them.
So it's really interesting, sometimes I hear stories that museums, they do have, like, for instance, our ancestors in colonials. And they're scared to disclose their connection to contemporary descendant communities. Because the concern is, well, then the descendants will want them back. And it's almost like this supporting process, because particularly DNA, it has a relatively short half-life, right? That Indigenous ancestors are just almost traded among non-Indigenous peoples as almost gold. And the concern is, well, if they are repatriated back to their home communities, then they'll be lost to the subject of scientific study and progress, and lost to the potential of individuals that write New York Times best-selling books about our histories, which is incredibly full of hubris when you consider like how many people are interested in the story of mankind, Indigenous peoples. We have our own stories. This is like a story of you all. But the interesting thing here is not just the MOUs and the data use agreements that usually get written without us at the table to represent directly, but also the interesting data definitions that are structured against us. So, for instance, with collection of DNA from living individuals, yes, there is informed consent, but also, if you're using an informed consent form that was written in the 90s or from the tissue collection in the 70s from a clinic, and it has like a very broad use term of like you consent to your use for genetic studies. That term means something different when genomic technologies were relatively more rudimentary to where we are now, and where we can interrogate like not only information that identifies the individual, but everyone the biologically related to, which reopens to community risk and genomic racial profiling, and having these biological mediated narratives that might substantiate negative stereotypes for our people using DNA, and can we use to disenfranchise our land rights, right? But very interesting that on top of that, like there are ways in which at the NIH level and the federal level, in which we have something called a single IRB mandate, by which a university can just say, hey, yeah, we recognize your tribal IRB or RIB, but we have a policy as an institution to refuse to see review to any other IRB. How is that respecting tribal IRBs? And big institutions do that all the time. And then that's just for humans that can consent, for our ancestors who cannot consent, for unfortunately termed non-human subjects research, which is ridiculous because they're Homo sapiens. Then they don't have to go through a rigorous IRB approval of the institution. And then we're back to the whole hoarding of information. And it's really interesting because these definitions are not consistent. If you think about the gut microbiome information, it's considered non-human subjects in the US, but many other nations and across the world consider as human subjects because you're literally dividing them from themselves. So information. So anyway, there's a lot of ins and outs and loopholes, and these types of legal sort of mouse hunting of like trying to get around rules and tribal sovereignty and bypassing it it happens all the time and it's exhausting, but also requires like knowledgeable individuals who are placed in these decision-making pathways to be able to foresee that. And that's another good thing about the labels too, is because then we can actually label the data itself and track it as it goes along with the data. And it can potentially also help us with some of this prominence and the tracking of the data back to the communities.
And then some of the work from my department, because I'm coming at this from like a tribal libraries, archives and museums context. So working within a sovereign tribal government and doing those relationships with external institutions such as university museums or state museums, or even like just local private. That also includes archives as well. So I've come across that attitude of hoarding and protecting, and knowing that archivists have this need to create access to everything, but without realizing, well, when you ask them, well, how are you creating access to the tribal communities, whose information this is, whose knowledge this is, you're actually creating barriers and you're upholding those barriers to that knowledge, to the people who can use it the best and also interpret it in a way that is culturally relevant. And so it also goes into like partnership building as well, building those relationships, because sometimes it requires like, well, what is your retention schedule? Because we've run across where local records repositories like within the state will have actually disposed of some of our materials, where fortunately we had allies who were familiar with our history, who actually alerted other folks within the town to like get the Indian proprietor records out of the dumpster. And then with the allyship with like the local select board of the town, and then like the Massachusetts state rep, Smitty, Pegnatelli, was able to go to the state of Massachusetts and pass legislature that any archival materials regarding like art history to a certain date and prior will automatically be given over to the tribe, which is a really beautiful example of what allyship looks like and how that can benefit tribal museums, because we don't even know till this day how much Indigenous archival materials has ended up in the dumpster, especially when you're thinking of all the tribal nations who were dispossessed of their lands and pushed out west in order to suit this American mythology that was being developed in the 1700s and 1800s. And we've also usually like examples of like other partnership collaborations between tribes and external institutions have really helped to reassure some of those worries of like people working in like archives or like in the universities or museums. Because what we've seen within like the past 10 years is like all of the shared mutual benefits. I think there's always been this fear of like lack of resources, lack of, I guess, accessibility, or even like lack of, I guess there's always this fear that they're gonna lose out, when in fact, like when you collaborate with tribal nations and you work with tribal nations on what those agreements are and returning materials, whether they be like digital surrogates or even like making sure that if this ever comes up for removal of the collections, make sure it gets returned back to the tribe. So this is talking about materials that do not fall underneath the NAGPRA, that cannot be repatriated. But however, we're finding more and more of those knowledges do actually fit in with that scope, because it might not be the item or the ancestor themselves, it's documented materials about that ancestor or about those items, so those are connected. So hopefully, you know, there's some redoing of like some of those those laws here in America that as far as determining what can be repatriated. But then also if we've seen where collaborating with tribes actually helps the universities to ensure that what they're doing is ethical. And that also, that the knowledge that is being produced is actually going directly back to the community and supporting all of like these rematriation and reclamation efforts for tribal nations so that we can preserve and enrich our culture. And that's one thing we always hear, well, Indigenous peoples are at the forefront for climate resilience or for biodiversity. Well, we need access to all that data and that information if everybody in the world's going to be coming to Indigenous peoples. Like keeping the door shut to us is not helping anybody.
You were just speaking about agreements, and Darren said something about, don't start with an LU. So I wonder if you could just speak briefly, what do you start with?
Like usually it starts with assessing what is out there. And then cold calling and see, and also looking at what projects that organization, that institution has already had in place. And prioritizing who is gonna be the best partner to work with, because we want institutions that have already done their groundwork. Ensuring that they know how to be an ally to Indigenous peoples, they know about Indigenous sovereignty, they know about the issues that are affecting Indigenous cultural heritage, Indigenous like data. And so those are the ones we want to go to. Otherwise, it just becomes this relationship of extraction, where it's like, it's not the Indigenous people's job to teach people how to come correct. Like that's the institution's work. That's like the work of like these departments of diversity, equity, and inclusion. They should be the ones informing and educating the whole college community, from the leadership all the way down to the students, even the families of the students, I would say, with any kind of like public outreach engagement that they do.
Did you want to say how do we start these things? I mean, there's so many ways to start it. I'll say, there's a role for our Indigenous activists that call upon from outside the university for an ethical relationship. There is people like inside like me, or like, give us our plan back, and then like, oh, you can't do that. Well, how about data sovereignty? I mean, we do all sorts of little things. I think education is key. I think understanding, and who advocates, I think is really important. But I always find that the varieties of pressures that are critical to this. So, and I think that sounds. I throw a lot of mud at the wall for any of these projects, and I should be more strategic. I'm very strategic also, but the idea that we could just, the pathways are always going to be dependent upon that institution, that Indigenous context, territory, grouping. So I think it's very but it takes collective efforts from a variety of situations. When I think about the universities, as a place that is recognizably exploitative and slow to change, despite all you crazy leftists working in the university. It's this dissonance that defines the university that also creates, I think, potential pathways for its devolution.
In that variety of pressures, I want to uplift these activist stickers that have act and the not verified stickers. Love that so much. And just before we move to lunch, just wanted to offer if any of you have any provocations or just questions or something to give to this group of people and the folks tuning in, specific, go away and continue to. For an instruction.
We need more education about why we're giving up our DNA freely to companies like 23andMe and Ancestry. I understand that there are displaced individuals that want to reconnect with their communities, but Ancestry is not, the genetic ancestry testing is not that way, and we are literally, when we give our DNA to these companies, paying them to sell our data downstream for unconsented purposes. And we have to think, when we are giving up our DNA to these tests, who is getting access to this and who is profiting from this? And we need to start asking questions from everybody that has this information in us today.
We're gonna move into lunch and we'll be back at 1:30. Are there any instructions for lunch? No. Have a wonderful time. We'll see you.